What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Throughout all of the buffs, nerfs, and releases in League of Legends history, there's been quite a few champions that haven't been so good. But amongst the weak champions, there have been some that were so incredibly bad that they caused the champion by themselves to be a complete troll pick. And it's fun to take a look at the champions on the level of Revive Rally Jungle Soraka. As we count down the list, we'll be measuring these champions by how weak they were at the time, and the abysmal play that these champions caused. Let's get started. Number 10 is post-rework Veigar on patch 5.4. Before this rework, Veigar was a completely unplayed champion for both solo queue and competitive play, and this rework initially completely destroyed his kit by making his stun almost unusable and nerfing the damage on his abilities as well with only some minor compensations. His unfair stun and exceptional burst were the strengths his kit brought to the table, and the rework kind of ruined them completely, and he became a complete joke of a champion until he was able to receive an extensive amount of buffs to put him back on the strong power level that we see today. Number 9 is post-nerf Rengar on patch 4.5. This patch was an attempt at a rework for Rengar's kit, but really all it did was completely destroy his kit by introducing huge counterplay and nerfing every single ability in his kit in some way without any compensation whatsoever. His ultimate and Bolus Strike had significant weaknesses added to them, and the power of his Savagery and Battle Roar received huge hits, and this change cemented the idea that Rengar has a kit that really is impossible to balance, as despite redesigning his kit completely and introducing reasonable counterplay, it made him incredibly weak, and the next patch he was buffed into a completely overpowered state once again. A second Rengar rework is planned for the future, as his kit still remains unhealthy and impossible to balance. Number 8 is post-nerf Urgot on patch 1.0.0.143. The nerf he received in this patch would go on to cause Urgot to be the running joke in the community of an underpowered champion that lasted for about 2 years. He stayed as the lowest win rate in the game for almost that entire time, with only a few exceptions here and there. He became the ultimate comparison for an underpowered champion, and for good reason. Riot completely destroyed his kit with the nerf to the range on his ultimate and making his laning phase super weak by nerfing his Q and his E. It wasn't until the very end of Season 4 that he would finally receive some buffs to bring him out of that state, and he is definitely the champion on this list that remained in his underpowered state for the longest amount of time. Number 7 is Release Lucian on patch 3.10. On release, Lucian had a bug that would make his Q cost double the mana, as well as having incredibly low numbers and damage values in his kit, and his passive was super clunky and had fairly poor targeting. His kit was super weak for a variety of reasons, half of which were completely unintended, so Lucian was essentially a victim of bad luck and spaghetti code more than anything. He was buffed in the next few patches and eventually became a total monster, so we can't say that he suffered for too long, as he had more than his fair share of time in the spotlight thereafter. Number 6 is post-nerf Twitch from early Season 2, but didn't really result from any specific patch. Not many are going to remember this one, as it was overshadowed a little bit by a couple of other champions that will be revealed later on this list, but Twitch at the time had a kit that was so incredibly weak that playing him at all was considered to be a total troll pick. Players would rage quit just because they had a Twitch on their team, and although it occurred as a culmination of patches, if you take a look at the massive buff he received in patch 1.0.0.143, it's insane how weak he actually was before that buff. After about a year in his underpowered state, the buff in 1.4.3 improved his range, base stats, and every single ability he had significantly, to finally bring him back into the spotlight after being a complete troll pick for about an entire year. Number 5 is post-rework Zilean on patch 5.4. After the nerf to Zilean's global passive on patch 4.19, just like Veigar, Zilean was a completely underplayed and already a fairly weak champion, but the rework was a huge nerf to his kit and just made things for him so much worse, with the intention of making his kit a little bit more healthy and well designed. But the rework was just a huge nerf to his kit and made things for him so much worse, with the intention of making his kit a bit more healthy and well designed. However, it failed to bring meaningful compensation for the gutting of his power, and we were left with a champion that became a complete laughingstock for a few patches afterwards and took a fairly long while to recover, as he was slowly buffed and even still is struggling to see play here and there today. Number 4 is pre-rework Karma from Season 2, but again didn't result from any specific patch. This is actually an interesting case to me, as although on paper she didn't seem that weak, especially compared to some of the other champions on this list, but she suffered a lot from a true lack of purpose in her kit. Her damage and scaling wasn't high enough to be played as a mid lane mage, and her utility wasn't good enough to be played as a support, and her kit didn't make sense anywhere else, and so she was stuck in a spot that made her completely unplayable, and was one of the champions that overshadowed Twitch as mentioned earlier. She was a troll pick for a very long time, up until she received a complete rework and found her way back into the meta. Number 3 is Release Yorick on patch 1.0.0.120. This is a fun one, as not many will remember it since it lasted for exactly one patch. Release Yorick had a kit with numbers and features tuned to be so incredibly weak that he was completely unplayable and a total joke. The buff he received in the patch following his release was incredible and improved every single ability significantly, as well as the power of his ghouls in general. He also had a few bugs on release that hurt his kit even further and overall contributed to him being very underpowered. Fortunately, it didn't last too long, but Yorick proved to have a super unhealthy kit after seeing a little bit of competitive play here and there, and so Riot hasn't exactly been on his side in terms of balance throughout the years following. Number 2 is Season 2 post-nerf Evelynn on patch 1.0.0.120. After receiving what I believe was the biggest nerf of all time, Evelynn eventually became a champion that simply just had no strengths. She had poor damage, poor crowd control and utility, and was super squishy with little mobility. After the nerf, she was a total joke and has been the go-to comparison for troll picks throughout the years. As well, her stealth was a super unhealthy mechanic that kept her from being buffed at all, and so she remained in this incredibly underpowered state for an entire year until her kit received a complete rework. At the time, Evelynn was the troll pick that overshadowed Karma and Twitch from being talked about too often, and for very good reason. And number 1 is Release Syndra on patch 1.0.0.147. If you played during the time she was released, you'll remember that when Syndra came out, she had an insane win rate of just about 26%. To me, that is just mind-blowing that such a low win rate is even possible, but with super low numbers and loads of bugs, Syndra barely managed to win 1 out of every 4 games that she was played in. She received buffs and bug fixes for 3 consecutive patches after her release, and for a couple patches after as well. It took a lot of work, but she was eventually able to be played, and became a decent champion for some time. But the incredibly low power that her kit had on release, as well as the bugs that contributed to her being weak, makes Release Syndra the most underpowered champion in League of Legends history.